What is a regression test? Well, that's another story.
И при полном регрессном тестировании, которое занимает, например, 15 дней, это много.
Should we hire more testers? I said, wait. Yeah, first develop the problem and then develop the solution. And let's see what the real problem is. Okay. Then the senior tester was paralyzed. When I came there, I really saw something like the picture I show here. Yeah. Another senior tester just had left the company because he wanted more money and he didn't get more money. So the poor guy was sitting here with this pile and 15 developers putting stuff on the pile all the time. So he said, Niels, can you help us? I said, well, yeah, but he didn't see my face. Yeah, can you help us out? I said, yes. But then he said, how do you know? Which is a good question. So I said, well, I have a magic tool. And my magic tool is the good old Deming cycle, plan, do, check, act. Yeah. Who still knows plan, do, check, act, the Deming cycle? I can't see you, so I'll assume that some know and some don't. So let's go through it. Planning, we do more or less. Do, we usually do all day. And for check and act, we don't have time, right? So the intuitive cycle, I call pull do. I can't call it plan because if we do something and we are done, we jump into the next thing. So what was the next thing? We do it. What was the next thing? We do it. So I can't call it plan, I call it pull. Pull do. Now, if intuition would be perfect, everything we do would be perfect, right? Not everything we do is perfect. So apparently, intuition sometimes puts us in the wrong direction. So once we recognize that, we can think, okay, let's plan. And planning is twofold: what to achieve and how most efficiently to achieve it. And then we go to the do, and in the do, we say we carry out the plan, which means the plan must be doable, and we must follow the plan, right? So assume we did that in the check phase, or Deming called it also the study phase. We study was the result according to plan and the way we achieved it according to plan. If yes, should and can we do it better? If no, how can we do it better? And then in the act phase, we are going to see what are we going to do differently. Because if we don't do anything differently, the result will be the same, right? So what are we going to do differently? Now, planning we do somewhat, doing we do all day, checking, well, in our mind, we know usually what we could do, but we are so busy, so we don't have time. And the act is usually what is lacking. So let's actively go to the act and see what are we going to do differently the next time. So if I hear a team or anybody complaining about a problem and I hear it again and this is a problem and of course it is they who are causing the problem and not me. Yeah. So instead of complaining about the problem, you are stuck in the check phase. What are we going to do about it? That is such an important sentence to ask. What are we going to do about it? Moving to the act phase. So James said, well, you can come and see, let's see how we get things moving. Because customers were leaving the company because they didn't get their products. So let's see what the real problem was. So where's the projector? Switch on the projector, and I asked the guy, the tester was sitting there, and I asked the guy, can you put your list of chunks of work that you have to do? Well, before I went there a few times, so he had already prepared this. He knew my question would come. So, and of course, I can't tell exactly what he wrote there, but I called it package 1, 2, 3, etc. So I said, okay, interesting. And how much time do you need for these? He already had some experience in estimation, so he put the days there he thought he was needing for completing these packages before getting to the customer, editing up 106 days, which is about half a year. Now, customers didn't want to wait another half year. So what can we do about it? I said, just for the exercise, let's first cut one of the packages into pieces. Yeah, so he did that. He knew the contents of all these packages. He knew that very well. So he came up with this list. And in the end, there could be some more, but okay, it's just for the exercise. Let's start with this. Now the next question is, this was not acceptable. So I said, how about, you get the whole company at your disposal. Everybody can help you to solve this problem. Developers stop developing, stop putting things on the pile. And if you need the boss to do something for you, I make sure he does it. So you can imagine his smile already went up a little bit. So I said, if you have the whole company at your disposal and you still have the responsibility to say, yes, this can go to the customer and the customer will be happy, how many days do you need for the packages still? So this is the list he produced. He added that up and 47 days, which is about 9 weeks. And there was one junior tester left. She could do some stuff. And this was what he thought the developers could do. Just a sanity check that not the others wouldn't fit in the 47 days. Okay, so the next question is, who's waiting for all this? So he put on the names of the customers waiting for it. And we saw already something interesting. We have here, we don't know who that is. So why should we work on that if we don't even know for who it is? Yeah, waiting for feedback. Should we work on that one? Probably not. So then I explained the concept of the timeline. I said, I have this concept of timeline. This is now, and every 2 weeks or faster, we're going to deliver stuff to eagerly waiting customers. So, in which order are we going to serve these customers? Yeah. One thing is, some customers may not be waiting anymore because they're already working in other projects. They're not waiting on our solution anymore. So, before we start on something, we can send them a mail. We say, we will have a solution at a certain date. Will you be ready to accept it? Yeah, because maybe other customers are more eagerly waiting. And some customers are only screaming and ordering nothing. So, what are the most important customers? So, based on that, he looked at the list again. Okay, is there any customer you can serve tomorrow? Make happy tomorrow. He looked at the list and he said, I think this I can do. So we were sitting there on the 22nd of February. So at 24th of February, the customer could receive a working package. Yeah. And that way he continued. He could already put a few things there. Whether that's true or not is not the point. He knew his customers, he knew his stuff. So it was just the technique I was giving him for him to use. So the result was tester empowered. You are empowered. You have the whole company at your disposal, even the boss if you need him. The whole package was gone in 9 weeks. The so-called full regression testing was redesigned because one of the developers said, guys, the so-called full regression testing, which means we have to do all the tests we ever made on this product, only covers about 1/3 of the whole product. So what's the point? So I said, okay, let's park that for the moment. Full regression testing, forget it. We redesign it, and you tester and you find out what is necessary to make the customer happy now. Well, the result was within these 9 weeks, gradually, customers systematically were made happy, and they were amazed what suddenly happened with this company. The company was on the line because customers were going away, and suddenly they were happy and amazed and coming back. So, interesting, he took with him a small whiteboard. He could take that with him to a meeting room. On his desk he had this small whiteboard with 4 weeks on it, and every week he replanned what are we going to deliver this week to which customers. From that moment he never had a big pile anymore. He kept up with development ever since. Revenue increased. A year later I was at this company and they said, Niels, because of what you told us, turnover increased by 70%. I said, guys, it wasn't me. You did this. Great. So later, tester promoted to product manager and coaching some new testers that were hired to succeed him. Everybody happy. Okay, so what is the technique? Timeline is one of the techniques I have in my toolbox to help teams and help people in the work. So what are the principles we were using here? First, we cut the work into chunks. We estimate, which usually take very little time. How many days? Yeah. Adding them up, and even if the estimates are not very precise, which they usually are not, if you add them up, the sum usually is much more precise. That's just simple mathematics. Now, what do we normally see? Because most projects are late, aren't they? So what we usually see if we do this exercise, we see it doesn't fit in the available time. The deadline is earlier, right? You have that experience? So instead of, when you make this list, already start saying, oh, it doesn't fit, and already start changing. No, first I want to see the truths, the ugly truths, and nothing but the ugly truths. And then we are going to say, what are we going to do about it? Because failure is not an option. So we find strategies to solve the dilemma. We select what we think is the best strategy and predict what will happen when. Well, that's what we did, remember? And we learn and repeat every week, keeping predictions up to date. So as another example, it was a one-person project, and I think I did that in the afternoon because I was there. So let's take another issue. So the guy was working with, and in this case we call it activities. He did activities in order to create some result for customers. So he estimated the number of days he needed for these activities. Normally we work in hours, but in the example we take here, bigger chunks, so number of days. He already spent some days on these things, and there was still to spend. And then we already can see what's the ratio of real and estimated. Yeah. How much did he spend and what he estimate? And if that is usually 1, his estimation capability is very good. If you see big numbers, then either in the beginning he thought it was very simple and it wasn't that simple, or maybe he needed to learn extra or whatever. So this already gives some information. Then we can calibrate. Forget this for the moment, but I just want to show it, to show the idea behind it. Yeah. Calibration factor. So if we take the days he already spent and divide by the days he estimated, in this case, he spent 40% more than he estimated. Let's assume that all the other tasks also take 40% more. The remainder of these tasks we are not going to move there, because having done this work, he probably knows better what still has to be done. Now, we can say, what is the time still to spend on these activities? And then we can put dates on it. Apparently, it must have been a month later that I was there again, because this was in 29th of March. So one day later, it would be done, etc. And the interesting thing is that you don't have to tell management about stories, about your estimates, about velocity and all that things. Yeah, what management wants to know, what the market wants to know, what the customer wants to know is only this. If on the 5th of June I get stuff, what do I get and what do I not get? And if some things are below the line that needs to be on top of the line, we still can move things to have the best result at that date. So, if on the timeline we see we won't make it on time, we have to think, what are we going to do about it? If it easily fits, we can start working and probably run into trouble anyway. If it exactly fits, then we probably we are going to run into trouble. And if it doesn't fit, we started too late. Yeah. When I started to make this picture, this lowest bar was going beyond the fatal date until I realized after the match you can't score a goal. So there is no point on drawing a line behind the deadline. Now, there are several options we have if we see we are not going to make it. What can we do? Yeah, I showed you some examples, but the thing is, 4 things we see being done in every project, but they don't work. On the contrary. But intuitively, they are so strong that they still always happen. So we have to recognize them and to see what we are doing and saying that is not the right way. So what are those 4 deceptive options? The first one is hoping for the best. Yeah, it won't fit, but we hope it will. Well, if it doesn't fit, it won't. Or we have to make it. Let's go for it. Yeah? If it doesn't fit, it doesn't fit. Then working overtime. Anybody of you working overtime? Never ever work overtime, because you're fooling yourself and your boss. 40 hours of work is already heavy enough and you make a certain number of errors. If you work more than 40 hours a week, then you get more tired and you make even more errors than you normally would make. So in the end, you're only working overtime to repair the errors you made because you were working overtime. Therefore, never ever work overtime, so that once or twice a year you have the energy to do it when it is really necessary. Our work is full of paradoxes. Never ever do it so that you can do it when it's really necessary. But usually it is not. Then the 4th deceptive option, moving the deadline. You may have heard about Parkinson's law, work, expense, to fill the time for its completion. If you have so much time and you move the deadline, you have more time, you still spend that time. And the student syndrome is the other side of the same medal. Remember when you had to do an exam. When you had to do an exam, when did you start? 3 weeks before the exam or the night before? Be honest. Yeah? So if we don't feel the pressure of the fatal date, then we don't work as hard. I'm not talking about stress, hard, not that bad stress, but no stress is boring. Good stress makes a feeling of accomplishment. And that's why deadlines are so important, good deadlines. Then there is a fifth option. That's a dangerous one, but sometimes you need it. So if you have a 1-person month project, you can do it with 6 people in 2 months, with 4 people in 3 months, with 2 people in 6 months, right? Wrong. And Brooks, he made Brooks Law, 1975. Yeah, maybe many of you weren't born yet. Adding people to a late project makes it later. Why? Because if people are added, you have to tell them what we are doing, they have to learn what we are doing. So you can try to open a can of developers, you can try to open a can of testers, but it makes it slower. And it's even not a late project. Adding people to projects can make them later. And Putnam actually measured it. He took about 500 projects of similar size and different team size. And the projects were already run, so they couldn't change the numbers anymore. And he found that the cheapest project is 2 people. The fastest project is 5 to 7 people. But it's only 20% faster. So, but maybe there's the economic optimum because time to market is important. And there is a level where nobody can do it. We call that the 9 mothers area. And some people think that if you want a baby in 1 month, you need 9 mothers to do it. And then if you have more people in your team, it explodes because it takes longer. You have to pay them longer. So, and you get less result. Why? It has to do with all these connections between people. Yeah? 1 person, no connection. 2 people, 1 connection. 3 people, 3 connections. 4, 6 connections. And it goes almost exponential. So if you have more than 7, 8 people, you don't work anymore, you only have meetings. But how do you design an airplane? Well, probably it goes wrong. Yeah? Look at Boeing. Well, many companies, many airplane companies are not anymore there. So it is not whether Brooks Law bites you, it is how can I handle it? And then the next option is saving time. And that's the low-hanging fruit. Because we don't have enough time to do everything we think we have to do, but we can save time without negatively affecting the result. And that's the nice thing. By doing efficiency in what, why, for who we do, doing the right things, not doing what is not necessary. Half of what people do in a project later proves not to have been necessary. If in a retrospective we see we shouldn't have done it, the time is already gone. If in a perspective we see what we are going to do wrong, or going to do that is not necessary, we still can decide not to do it. Immediate saving. Yeah. So if 50% is not necessary, and we can reflect and preview the 50% of those 50%, we already saved 25% of the whole time, in which we can do interesting things. Efficiency in how we do it, things in the right way, the product, the project, how to organize it, continuous improvement, plan, do, check, act, plan, do, check, act. Efficiency in when we do it, in the right order. Yeah, that is why the timeline on the whiteboard he carried was not just one delivery cycle, but a few delivery cycles to be able to move things in the right order. And time boxing. Time box has an end, has a deadline. And time boxing is so much more efficient than feature boxing. Feature boxing is waiting until it's done. And remember Parkinson's law. Then it will take a long time. So this is low-hanging fruit that I'm after. Continuous elimination of waste. You may have heard about lean, continuous elimination of things that are not necessary. But even more important than all this stuff, than deadlines, is starting deadlines. A starting deadline is the last day we can start to deliver by the end deadline. Every day we start later, we will end later. And then we can tell the customer, sorry, we already know you won't get it. But failure is not an option, so we look at the starting deadlines, and then if any of the starting deadlines is before now, we have to do even more about it. We cannot do everything at the same time, so hopefully there is space here to move things to now. And don't worry if then you get a hole in your timeline here, because you probably will need that time anyway. So more important, if you focus on the deadline, you will go over it. If you focus on the starting deadline, you can make sure you don't need an excuse. Now, this timeline is one of the many things we have, and we call that evolutionary project management elements, or EVO, from Tom Gilp. Tom Gilp is the grandfather of all agile, because this evolutionary stuff basically uses the plan, do, check, act continuously on the product, the process, the project. We look at the business case. Why are we going to do it? Why are we going to improve what? Requirements, what are we going to improve and what not? And quantification, otherwise we don't know where we are, where we should be, and when we are done. Architecture and design, which is selecting the optimum compromise for the conflicting requirements, because requirements are always in conflict. Yeah, better performance, budget, for instance. And then early review and inspection, measuring quality while doing. So the longer our problems stay in our work, the more expensive it is to find and fix. So with early review and inspection, we can minimize how the errors go through our work and get them before we are done. Because the customer should never find out that we are not perfect. People make mistakes, we are people, we make mistakes, but the customer shouldn't find out. What I added to what I learned from Tom Gilp is using this quantification also in the planning of our work. So we have a weekly task cycle, a bi-weekly or shorter delivery cycle. In Scrum they call that a fixed 2-week sprint. And timeline is what we just talked about, getting and keeping control of time, predicting the future. And feeding program and portfolio management, because now we know what we are talking about. Before it was just gaming what they did because they got fake data. And now we give them data that we can also deliver. So today we talked about timeline. I have many more things in my toolbox that you can use in any approach you are using, whether you use waterfall, Scrum, or Safe, or whatever. All these things can be useful. Zero defects is the basic attitude. You can find on my website also a video about zero defects, also with Russian translation. The business case is why are we doing it? Requirements engineering is what, how much, and are we done? Architecture is and design is how are we going to do it the best way? Early review and inspection is check as early as possible. The task cycle is for the efficiency of what we do. The delivery cycle is for the effectiveness of what we do. And timeline, what will happen and what are we going to do about it? Because failure is not an option. Right result, right time, quality on time. That's my motto. So that's what I wanted to talk about. How we solved a QA problem. And if you have any questions, you can use Slido with the event code TCM 2020. And you can find more on my conferences pages, and on the booklet pages. Booklet number 8 describes the case I was talking about today. And on my booklet pages, you can find even more stuff. That's what I wanted to talk about. Any questions? Do you use some tools or a whiteboard is enough? Yes, a whiteboard is enough. Well, I have a small tool, but basically I work on whiteboard. The thing is, the more data you put in the computer, the more we lose control. And many people love to put data in the computer. You know that why? Then we cannot see it. So there was this project where the boss came in and asked the guys, how is it going? And they said, well, you go to that project manager. He has Microsoft Project and he can tell you everything. So the boss went to the project manager and the project manager showed him Microsoft Project and the boss looked at it, didn't know what he saw there had no relation what he saw the guys doing. So he went back to his office. Plan B. Plan B is project manager. Can you put what you have in Microsoft Project on the whiteboard? Why do we have to do that? It's clear. Well, if the boss doesn't understand it, what's the point? If you are the only guy who understands it, who does it. So after some talking, he went to the whiteboard, put his timeline on the whiteboard. So boss comes in and he asks the guys, how's it going? Well, project manager has a whiteboard there. You can have a look there. Okay. He went to the whiteboard, looked at it, looked at what the guys were doing. No connection. So he went back to his office. Plan C. I said, guys, how about you put what you're doing on the whiteboard and a timeline plan, just as I explained today. So it took a little bit more time, but they were clever guys, just like you. So it took a little bit more time, but they put their timeline on the whiteboard. They were working, several people were working on that, several timelines with deadlines, customers waiting. And then the boss came in and he said, guys, how is it going? And together they walked to the whiteboard and they explained, look, this is what I'm working on. And the boss said, oh, that looks good. And that other thing, is it better to swap that because that is a more important customer and he's more eagerly waiting? And then they discussed and either they swapped or not, depending on the discussion. There's only one problem for the project manager. He came to me, he said, Niels, I'm thinking I'm getting out of the loop. I said, yes, I've seen that. What are you going to do about it? A few weeks later, he left because now the team was self-organizing. They can do that. And now what on the whiteboard was in sync with what they were doing. And one of the rules was the whiteboard should be at least once a week reflect the truths, the ugly truths, and nothing but the ugly truths. And probably not any more ugly, because once you see the ugliness, you solve it before it gets a problem. Yeah, so I love whiteboards. Thank you for your speech. What about documentation when we always have a deadline mess? Do you have a deadline mess? Use this technique and you don't have messes for the deadline anymore. Yeah. So if 1 week before the deadline you say, guys, sorry, we are not done, then your customer has a problem. If several delivery cycles before you say, we may get into trouble, what are we going to do about it? You can together discuss with your customer what to do about it. Once you are already so efficient that you don't have waste anymore and still it doesn't fit, you know that much earlier. Everybody knows it much earlier, but project managers usually hope, hope, or we have to, or work overtime. Remember those things? Yeah. So deadline mess, we can solve easily. You can try this, you can ask me to help. And documentation. Well, I have not in I have the concept of the design log. In the design log, we log what we have to achieve, reasoning, questions and answers, calculations, whatever, and possible solutions. And then we say, okay, what solution are we going to choose? Why? Then at the top of a chapter, it says this is what to achieve. At the bottom, it says this is how we're going to achieve it. And then 2 weeks later, you say, well, it was a good idea, but doesn't work properly. So you repeat piece of that, a part of that. And at the bottom of your chapter, it says this is our current implementation. That's my documentation. And it's a concept, my design log. But it can be a Word document, it can be Excel. I use PowerPoint for making drawings and things like that. So it's just documenting what is necessary. And then people ask me, how much should I document? Well, simple answer. Imagine that a year later, you or somebody else has to change something in what you did. Then the documentation should be such that in 1 day you are up and running again. Did you ever have 1 year later to do something? Yeah. How much time did it take before you were up and running again? Usually it can take weeks. Yeah. And actually, I was doing this myself recently. Yeah. I had made a product. That's my last project. I also sometimes develop something. Yeah, both hardware and firmware. And then I wanted to check out some experiment with this processor. So I said, can I use this board to check out my idea? So I took my documents, I found out how to install the IDE again, and within 1, maybe 2 days, I was up and running. Yeah. And if you don't have time for documentation, you're doing something wrong. What are we going to do about it? And it's correct. Sounds so simple, huh?
Друзья, может быть, есть еще какие-то вопросы в слайда? Если нет, то мы можем попрощаться с Ником уже, с Нилом. Ну что, Нил, thank you very much for your speech. It was great. And we... Bye-bye. This is applause for you.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry for not being there, but I hope it was still... I usually say that at the end of something like that. I said, I hope I didn't waste your time too much.
Thanks. Bye-bye. Bye-bye, Neil.